This is Creepy and Geeky. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Creepy and Geeky. I'm your host, Robert, and today's guest is Kat Hughes. She's a film journalist who primarily writes for the Hollywood News. Welcome to the show, Kat.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm not bad. I've just got my 3-year-old to bed, so I'm ready to get stuck in.
Oh, I remember those days. I've got a 1-year-old grandson. He just turned one, and he lives here with us, with his mom and dad. And all my kids live here with me, and so it's a big household. But yeah, we haven't reached 3 yet with him, but both of my kids are adults, so it's I remember those days, and I
Yeah,
remember how hard they were.
yeah. I mean, there's 20 years between me and my youngest brother, so I've sort of saw it from
Oh yeah,
afar
yeah,
then,
yeah.
but it's very different when you're in the eye of the storm.
Oh
It's
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Even with my grandson living with us, like we help and everything, but it's still them who deals with the bulk of it all. So it's an interesting thing not having to worry about it so much. But yeah, man, that's uh, having a 3-year-old. That's a fun time.
yeah. She's great. She definitely
Yeah,
keeps us entertained.
yeah, definitely. All right. Well, today we are talking Quentin Tarantino and specifically the movies written by him, but not directed by him. We're talking True Romance and Natural Born Killers. I think I'd like to start with True Romance, um, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, not just of something Quentin Tarantino had a part in. Uh, but it's to me, it's a fantastic movie. There's it's just the amount of people that they have in that movie that are just mega stars, either before or during or after that, who became much more prominent later. And it's just a fun story. And even despite it not being directed by Quentin Tarantino, it feels very much like a Tarantino film. Tony Scott did a great job directing it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think he's Tarantino has said it's his the most autobiographical thing he's ever written. I mean, not
Yeah,
he goes on to say, not that he had a girlfriend or that any of the plot necessarily happened, but I think he poured a lot of himself into Clarence, which I think is why Clarence is very, film nerd and pop culture nerd, and he gives all these
right,
like big long monologues when he's talking to people, like Elvis and that. I think that's the autobiographical part.
right. Yeah, I can see that there was a lot of what would have been Tarantino during that time period, that when he was writing that this was a crime story tacked onto autobiographical pieces of his life, for sure. And like for me, I've been a fan since I saw the movie back when it came to VHS, right around not too long after it premiered in '93. Whenever it first came out to VHS back then, I remember getting it and falling in love with it right then. And it it spoke to me on that level too, because I was a comic book geek, and I still am, a comic book geek who loves movies. And so it was very much like, okay, I can see myself in Clarence, to an extent. And I was never an Elvis fan, but it's for me, it was very much a recognizable thing, and I enjoyed it for that, and just all the other aspects of it. Just it's just a fun movie.
No, it really is. I mean, I came to it in a roundabout way. So I was I was late to the game. Christian Slater was sort of like the heartthrob of the
Hmm.
early 90s, but I wasn't a teenager till the latter half of the 90s. But I saw Heathers, and
Gotcha.
he became like my teen crush. At the same time as one of my friends discovered Val Kilmer, and he became
Mm.
her teen crush. So we would go to each other's houses and watch like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Top Gun and stuff. And we would be like, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if like they were in a film together?" And like Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt or somebody was in it as well, so that we could watch it with other people. And then like the week after we had that conversation, we went into our local video store, and there was True Romance, Christian Slater, Val Kilmer's name on it, reading the back of the blurb, Brad
Mm.
Pitt's in this. We weren't 18, which is what it's rated in the UK. So
Right.
whereas most teenagers, go up to people on the street and be like, "Oh, can you go and get us some beer?" We were like, "Excuse me, can you go and get us this video, please?"
Oh, it's
And
hilarious.
so that's how we obtained it, and we went rushing home. And I thought it was great. My friend was very disappointed because obviously Val Kilmer he is
Oh,
the
barely in it.
mentor
Yeah.
slash Elvis character. You don't even see you briefly see his face in a
Glimpses.
bathroom
Yeah.
mirror. So although she had been the one to purchase it, the video quickly came into my possession, and it got watched. It got watched a lot. I mean, for me, it's that opening like timed it was rewatches at the opening 17 minutes. It's the meeting at the cinema and going out for pie and
Hmm.
the whole billboard scene. I mean, I did a presentation at uni.
Oh,
It's
wow.
the mise en scène in it was like a mise en scène presentation, and the mise en scène in that scene is ridiculous. I mean, they're literally sitting in front of a billboard that says "Don't wait for the dust to settle," and that's
Yeah.
exactly what they're doing. They're jumping head on. And I mean, I'm not a rom-com kind of gal, but like True Romance, that's sort of like my brand of romance.
Oh,
There needs to be
yeah.
something a bit grittier underneath it. So yeah, I equally sort of fell head over heels for it the first time I watched it.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. I like, and that was one of the things too for me. Yeah, I'm not like I like rom-coms. They're fine. They're very fluffy and they can be fun depending on the writing and who's in it. Generally speaking, most are kind of meh, but there's some good ones here and there. But yeah, I like if I'm into a romance of some sort, it's got to be like you say, gritty. There's got to be something else going on to make that romance even more so. And for this, I believe this is for me, this is the best romance movie that I enjoy. And yeah, since when I got it, I would assume I got it either late 93, sometime in 94, because it would have been, I mean, it could have been 94, 95, even, depending on when it came out. But Pulp Fiction came out, and I had fallen into Tarantino stuff real hard, and I bought the tapes myself to get. And True Romance being what it was, I definitely watched that one a lot and probably wore out the tape on it. And uh and I would have been 19 when it first came out to theaters in 93. So I was a little bit older. I'm a little bit older than you now. But yeah, it's just with the people who are in it, the like, because I was attracted because I like Christian Slater. I liked him from Heathers, and there's a movie called Gleaming the Cube that
Yeah.
is not out on Blu-ray or anything, which kills me because I really want that movie. And um, but so he had a run of movies that I really enjoyed, and that True Romance just was like the perfect Christian Slater movie to me. And I don't know, it just speaks to me on another level. It's funny too because years ago I tried to do a podcast where it was just my son and I talking about movies, and we started out with Quentin Tarantino stuff, and we were watching the movies, and he hates True Romance. He just does not get it at all. And I'm like, what don't you get? This is a fun movie. Even if you don't like certain aspects, how can you not enjoy the movie in general? It's just a fun movie. There's like, it's like, because of the way Tony Scott makes movies, this is why I can't see where you would get bored with a movie that he directs, because they're so frenetic. They're so just fun. They're just moving so fast the entire time. And you just don't have time to breathe and get bored. So it drives me crazy every time I talk to him about it. And he's just like, yeah, I didn't like that one. So.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's 17 minutes in, they're already married. By like
Yeah.
half an hour in, Drexel's out of the way, and they're visiting Dennis Hopper. Then you get the great scene with Christopher Walken, Dennis Hopper, and then
Yeah.
you get to LA, and that's when we get all of the drugs, and then the police coming in, and it's got some. As much as there is a lot of violence in it, as with anything that Tarantino's written, there's a lot of humor there as well. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
there's this great sequence with Elliot and the police, and I think some of that was sort of like loosely improvised, but it's just
Yeah.
entertaining. It's like the bit where he's towards the end of the film where Elliot's wearing the wire and he's in the lift, and Clarence sort of pulls a gun
Mm-hmm.
on him, and you see the back and forth with Tom Sizemore and Chris Penn's characters sort of like laughing, going, he's not going to shoot you, he's not going to shoot you, and then all of a sudden it's like,
It's
no,
like,
he's
oh,
going to
he's
shoot
gonna
you.
shoot him. Yeah.
Like it's just, it shouldn't be funny, but the way that it is played, it is,
Yeah.
because it's always like a comedy of errors, because we by that point know that Clarence wouldn't do something like that, and we've seen
Right.
Elliot, he's got no spine from what we have seen of him, so it's just, I don't know, it is funny, it's not a bleak serious
No.
film.
No, and that's what I enjoy about it too. It's fun, it's funny, it's so well written. The dialogue is great. I mean, as it is with most Quentin Tarantino movies, that you can't touch them on dialogue, and it's just and character development and stuff. I mean, that's the thing. Like you said, in that first 17 minutes, by the time they're married, you believe by that point they are in love. I mean,
Mm.
just that sequence next to the billboard, they're in love. And that's not only the writing, but that's those performances by Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette is so good that you believe that they're in love, and you fall so deep into the story by that point. You're just like, okay, I'm with this ride. I'm going with this. And then we get Gary Oldman as Drexel Spivey. Talk about a fantastic role. Like, so the year before he had made Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and that's where I fell in love with him for the first time. And then seeing him as Drexel just cemented to me just how good of an actor he was. And I've been a fan ever since.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
it,
sorry,
go
I was
ahead.
gonna say,
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, he didn't even read a script. He just
Yeah.
like asked Tony Scott, what's it about? And he was like, well, he's like a white guy who thinks he's a black guy and he's a pimp. And Gary Oldman was like, yeah, I'll do that. That sounds amazing. And he still credits it as one of his favorite 2 or 3 performances.
Right. Yeah. And I can see why he had so much fun with that. Not only did he do that, but he came up with he worked with his hair and makeup people that he worked with on Dracula to create the look of Drexel. And he comes in, and Tony Scott's like, yes, let's do this. And so that's what I love about that kind of situation too, is not only is there give and take between the actors and the director in that way, that you just get like this fun collaborative medium that I like it when a director is willing to do that with their actors, is willing to let the actors bring stuff to the characters and build those characters, and especially because then that makes the actor have more fun with it and enjoy doing it. And that's why I think he really enjoys that character, is because he brought so much to it. And such a phenomenal role.
Yeah, it's great. And you got the little interaction with Samuel L. Jackson as well, sort of.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously he's gone on to work with Tarantino many times, but this in a weird way was sort of their first time working
Right.
together, even though I don't think Tarantino was on set for anything, but he must have, having been a part of True Romance and being familiar with his writing, that must have then helped going forwards to get him to sign on to things like Pulp Fiction.
Oh yeah, for sure. I yeah, Samuel L. Jackson's one of my favorite actors, and he just he knocks out of the park and everything. And even this very tiny role, he's so fantastic. And that's what's great about this movie is there's people you recognize in the tiniest roles. Brad Pitt, like you mentioned before, is in a very small role, and he's a
Yeah,
stoner throughout, which he also improvised a lot of his lines. Uh, so it's just that whole thing is just so fantastic that you get so many of these recognizable. You get the big guys like Christopher Walken and now I'm blanking on his name.
Dennis Hopper.
Clarence's dad, Dennis Hopper. Thank you. But you get Dennis Hopper and Christopher Walken. You get these veterans who, and then you get like people like Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette who are established but still in the beginning, and people who are very at the beginning of their careers in very small roles like Sam Jackson and Brad Pitt, and before they both hit superstardom. And it's so fun seeing that and getting that great mix of stuff. That's what, to me, that's what's fun about going back and watching it too, is I mean, I remember all these people being in it, but if you show it to somebody now who's never seen it, they're just gonna be like, oh my God, all these people are in this. So I mean, you get James Gandolfini, who
Yeah.
later on went on to do Sopranos, and he's in a not a prominent, like a super prominent role, but he's got a good portion of that movie. And it's I don't know, it's so fun. It's just such a fun, fantastic movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that Tony Scott has always sort of managed to do. I mean, I rewatched Top Gun recently, and you sort of look back through the cast of that. You know, you've got Michael Ironside and Tom Skerritt, and
Mhm.
obviously Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer. Um, Tim Robbins is in it. It's, you know,
Yeah.
there's something about a Tony Scott film, I think, that people were excited to get involved, and
Oh yeah.
he didn't. I don't think he had that snobbery of, well, I only want to work with like the really big established people. He wanted to work with the
Right.
people that were right for it. I think Christian Slater was the first person cast, and then they started sort of like building it around that, and like more and more people were sort of signing on to the point where
Right.
I think, you know, Christian Slater got quite, because he said he was still fairly early on in terms of his sort of bigger career. And, you know, suddenly he's finding out that Dennis Hopper's going to play his dad, that Christopher Walken's going to be on set, that, you know, all these other people are involved. And I think that is a testament to the reputation that Tony Scott had
Oh yeah.
for working with actors and letting them sort of do their thing.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And Tony Scott had he had Top Gun was his first big hit, and so he was still banking on a lot of that. He um uh Days of Thunder after that did pretty well. He's had his ups and downs, movie wise, and I know True Romance didn't do well at the box office, and the critics kind of were like, but it since has become one of those cult hits that people enjoy. And I just got my email yesterday that my Arrow True Romance disc is finally coming to me. I can't wait for that. Uh, I will rewatch it again, even though I just rewatched it. I will rewatch it again in glorious 4K.
Yeah, and I mean, it's already out over here, so I already have my
Right.
copy, and the 4K restoration is beautiful. Like
Oh
the
man.
colors. I mean, obviously the opening titles, you know, they're all in like a blue, and that
Yeah.
really pops in. All the costumes, you know, that Alabama wears especially, are all
Yeah.
brightly colored. So in a 4K UHD sort of environment, that's really all popping off of the screen. And the billboard scene is probably like one of like my favorite scenes in
Right.
films, period. And that's obviously at night, so there's a lot of black, which again is a perfect viewing environment for a UHD.
Oh
It
yeah.
really did. I mean, I've seen this film hundreds of times easily, and
Right.
watching it the other night on that version felt like watching it for the first time again, um, which was really strange. And now I'm sort of like as excited and pumped about the film as I was when I watched it when I was like 15. So I'm sort of like
That's awesome.
trying to sort of temper myself and not fall back into a Christian Slater spiral. So
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Time to queue up some Heathers and find Gleaming the Cube somewhere.
pump up the
Yeah, that one.
volume and
Yeah, pump up the volume. Yeah, do Broken Arrow. That one's a good
yeah.
one. Yeah. No, yeah, it's just yeah, this movie it's just so good. I I could gush over this movie all day long. Um, but yeah, the going back to some of it, the music, Hans Zimmer's score in this. I mean, besides the popular music that's played throughout it, the I guess the non-score music, which is interesting because I read that Tarantino had no um, well, he had input into the script. He had into the music. He had put music cues into it, but Tony Scott ignored all but one, and uh, and that was I believe Burl Ives' "Itty Bitty Tears." And beyond that, the rest of the music was put in by Tony Scott himself, and so, but it still feels like a Tarantino movie because the music is so meshed as part of it that it feels exactly like any other Tarantino movie. But the score by Hans Zimmer is just that kind of bright, almost kind of Caribbean style music that, especially in the Detroit scenes, is it helps brighten up what is otherwise a very dreary setting,
Mm.
and it's very light and keeps the mood light throughout. Um, and it's this fun theme that goes through the whole movie. And I've always loved that since I first heard it, since I first watched the movie. That score has just always been so fun for me.
Yeah, and it's like I say, it's when it's it's sort of light and everything. It's sort of mirroring Clarence and Alabama's sort of like innocence and obliviousness to what's happening around them. As much as they're
Right.
embroiled with these criminals and drug lords and whatever, they're completely oblivious. They're just focused on each other and like getting some money so they can go and have their future together. And I think that music is in a way, sort of subconscious way of replicating where their minds at. They are literally sort of like away with the fairies, and the music is sort of like personifying that.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I agree. It it's their theme. It's their love theme in a way to show just how deeply in love they are through the whole thing, and they won't be separated, and they're in it together. Um, yeah, it's just fun to see. Um, but the rest of the music's pretty good too. There's it's I think that it's probably more in general. It feels more kind of like a I don't know, maybe country rock infused um, soundtrack, um, because you've got kind of that Elvis feel throughout it because of Clarence's obsession with Elvis.
Yeah.
That a lot more of the music seems to be uh, channeled through his lens, and which is interesting. It's an interesting choice. It's not bad by any means. It's not that type of music that I listen to, generally speaking, but for the movie itself, it fits really well.
Yeah, I mean, it had me at including Billy Idol. I was raised on Billy
Yeah.
Idol, so again, those first few minutes when White Wedding plays, but Billy Idol himself styled himself on Elvis. So even though it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily fit in with the rest of the music that follows, like Big Bopper and things, if
Right.
you sort of dig into it, there is still that link back to Elvis.
Yeah.
Which
Well, and
is
it's interesting too that I read that the scene with Brad Pitt, where they're playing "Outshined" by oh my god, I keep blanking on names. It's the song "Outshined." It's the band that Chris Cornell was a part of. I
Oh,
can't think of
Soundgarden.
Soundgarden. Thank you. Oh my god. Um, but they, I guess they used it as a temp track originally in the scene and for test audiences, and everybody responded so well to it that they ended up using a big portion of their music budget to get that song for that scene. And so I thought that was interesting that out of all the songs, that was the one that they paid the most for, and people responded most to, and probably because at the time it was contemporary,
Yeah.
being 93 and being part of that grunge era. So, but yeah, so let me the just thinking about the performances. Christian Slater, obviously we talked about, he's so good in this. Patricia Arquette, um, she's like fantastic in this movie. Um, she's not just a, you know, the woman in it. She's very much a partner in the whole movie, and has great moments throughout. And that's what's nice to see, is it's a, to me it feels like a fully fleshed part rather than just a side character to Clarence's journey.
Yeah, definitely. She's got her own autonomy, her own strength. I think it's telling. We find out a lot about her in that billboard scene where she comes clean to Clarence, and she tells him about her past. But I think there's also a part of like how much of what she's saying is really, she says that she's only been for 4 days, but there's some aspects of the performance which maybe it was a little bit longer than that. And like when she's talking to him in the tattoo studio, and she's talking about Drexel, and she says, "Oh, he got rough with one of the girls the other day." In the audio commentary, Patricia Arquette, in her mind, when Alabama says it was her friend Arlene, it wasn't. It was Alabama. So
Mm,
it's like she senses in Clarence that he's jealous, or he's getting a bit angry, so she's trying to sort of keep him away from her former life. She just wants out. But then it's the way that how later on how she is with his dad. It's like, did she maybe have relationships with older men growing up, because is that like
right.
weird overly long kiss goodbye that they have.
Right.
But then the most telling part is the scene in the motel room between
Mm-hmm.
Patricia Arquette and James Gandolfini, where she sort of walks in, and you see Alabama instantly go into survival mode. She's playing a part. It's like back to the
Right.
beginning in the theater. She's like, oh, no, I'm not Alabama. I'm Sadie. We don't have any Coke, but there's a Pepsi machine down the hall. Like she's trying to win him over. She's trying to like almost not flirt, but she's trying to talk him out of the violence he's about to do. And then just when that doesn't work, and she's like thrown into this thing for survival, she's not waiting for Clarence. She knows that he's not going to come and save her, so she has
Right.
to save herself. And I think again that the way that Patricia Arquette performs it is like, you can kind of tell that there's been like aspects of Alabama where she's always had to do things to survive. So I mean, if I was in a situation, I wouldn't be like thinking like, let's get some shampoo and then my hairspray and then a
Oh
lighter.
yeah.
I would probably be,
Her
be a wrap
survival
of the
instincts were
yeah.
fantastic.
And I think that sort of again plays in that Patricia Arquette did like a lot of like thinking through the character, and I think she created this whole sort of back history where she had been one of those people that has to do what she can to survive. And in that motel scene, she just goes back into that survival mode. And it's just an incredibly powerful scene. No matter how many times you see it, you kind of always hope that maybe this time she'll get away before it gets to where it gets to. But then the
Right.
catharsis of seeing her overthrow her attacker is just great. It's a really strong female role, because then whilst Clarence doesn't rescue her, she later rescues him amongst
Yeah.
the gunfire in the Beverly Ambassador. She rescues him, which as a young female watching it is like, this is, we say, this is not just the love interest, this is not just like the eye candy or whatever. She is her own person, she's got her autonomy, and at the end of the day she's the one that saves him.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic too, because he wasn't originally supposed to survive the ending of that. In Quentin Tarantino's original script, he dies. And Tony Scott made the decision because he had fallen in love with the characters that he wanted them to live. He wanted Clarence to live and them to get a happy ending. And so he made that change. And Tarantino has since said that that was the right choice for Tony Scott's movie. And he enjoys what he did with that. And so, in keeping Clarence alive, and so it's. I love that Tarantino enjoys what he did with the movie, even though he changed things. And originally the script was in Tarantino's trademark, skipping time, skipping around on the timeline and everything. And so, but instead, Tony Scott put it in linear format and changed the ending and it just works. It works so much better than probably the way Tarantino would have had it done. Tarantino's would have been interesting, but I think Tony Scott's is probably the right way to go in terms of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read there was a script at some point online. I think I read it was. I don't think it was his original thing, but it definitely had the non-linear aspect. So it must have been an early draft, and I didn't connect to the characters as well as when you've been with them from the beginning. And I definitely think that works, and it's also a sort of a nice redemption in a way for Tony Scott, because like his romance in Top Gun is terrible. So it's nice to know that he can actually like tell a compelling love story.
Well, and I think that goes back to whoever the writer is too. As much as the director can only do so much with whatever is on the script and whatever his actors are giving him. And I think that's the difference between what's in Top Gun and what you're getting with True Romance, is that what Tarantino wrote was it works a lot more effectively. And Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette are actors who, not saying that Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis are bad actors, but given the material and what they had to work with, and to be fair, Top Gun really isn't about the romance. True Romance is about the romance. Everything else that revolves around it is in service to that part of the story, rather than the romance just being a side thing for all the planes and everything else going on in Top Gun, all the action going on in Top Gun. So I think that's a lot of what the difference is there. So is there anything else you wanted to talk about True Romance, or do we want to move into Natural Born Killers?
Well, I think something that is interesting is obviously it's Tarantino scripted. He didn't direct it, but it is still considered to be part of the Tarantino universe.
Yes.
Obviously there's a whole thing in Reservoir Dogs where Mr. White mentions a working girl called Alabama. And I think originally it was Tarantino's intention, like you say, for Clarence to die, and then for Alabama to play more of a role in Reservoir Dogs. She was going to sort of like be a side character, but obviously with how the film changed, that wasn't able to happen. But also I was reading that the movie producer Lee Donowitz, Tarantino has confirmed that character is the grandson of Eli Roth's character from Inglourious Basterds.
Yep.
Which, it's, I guess that was the thing when he was writing the script for Inglourious Basterds. He was like, well, I'm going to give this guy this name, and well, maybe he could be, because otherwise, I don't know if he incepted it the other way around. That's just hurts my head. So, but it is, I think, it, like you say, it does, although he didn't direct it, it does feel very early Tarantino. And the fact that there is, then when you sort of dig in, he has sort of accepted it himself into his world by then linking later characters to characters from this, I think is quite nice.
Yeah. No, and that's another thing. I've been a big fan of um that's part of what I am a fan of Tarantino, is because he does have these connections, these crossovers, which creates this bigger universe of characters and storylines, and which is something that I've always been attracted to. I know that it gets used a lot nowadays because of the MCU movies and stuff, this multiverse um, type of stuff. But for me, as being a longtime comic book fan, that's how Marvel comics, especially, have always been, where characters cross over and things are connected. And so that's when I find writers or movies or whatever that do that kind of stuff, I tend to appreciate them more. Stuff like Stephen King, where he's got characters that pop up in different books, Elmore Leonard, Quentin Tarantino movies, Kevin Smith movies, that kind of stuff. Those tend to be some of my more favorite things, because it's great to see a character that you enjoyed in one thing pop up, or at least a reference to something. So you do get this broader world. And that is just so much more fun for me.
Yeah, and the same. Especially they say like, like a Stephen King book and stuff, everything's,
Mm-hmm.
Derry's mentioned, or Castle Rock and stuff. It's rewarding. It's rewarding you as a consumer for seeking out something else. It's like, oh, I know
Right.
that.
Being part of that.
It's like you're in on it with the creator, that somebody else that's coming to this without having seen the thing isn't. They
Right.
don't necessarily miss out, but it's that extra sort of like, ooh, like I'm on the same wavelength as you. I like this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It rewards that repeat viewer, repeat consumer, that you get that little extra. Oh, hey, here's a character from something else, or here's a connection. Especially in Stephen King, where he's built up this universe, and especially revolving around the Dark Tower stories. And so it's even more fun if you get into that stuff. Um, but yeah, that's for me, it's always been a huge thing. If you can build a universe, if there's somebody who builds a universe around something, that's always more attractive for me, and you'll get my attention a lot more. Not that you won't. I love lots of stuff that isn't connected, but I mean, even if you say Edgar Wright's Cornetto trilogy, that's so loosely, it's just by the Cornetto ice cream wrapper, but even still, they're connected in such a way that to me is just fun as well. So, but yeah, no, I enjoy the fact that he connected Lee Donowitz to Donnie Donowitz, and made True Romance an official part of his universe, even though he didn't direct it. So I appreciate that, especially because True Romance is such a good movie and feels like a Tarantino movie, despite not being directed by him. Tony Scott. The interesting thing about True Romance is it feels like a Tony Scott movie and a Tarantino movie, and
Yeah,
it melds them so well. And Tony Scott was the perfect director to do something like that, and to meld those two universes in such a way that made sense, and was just fun and exciting all on its own. So,
yeah, definitely. I mean, I can't believe it's going to be 30 next year,
yeah, 30
which,
years next year.
and then like I did some math when I was watching it, and I worked out that like Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette were like 23, 24 when they made it.
Yeah.
Which I don't know, because I guess because especially when I was a teen, I just always assumed that they were sort of older. I mean,
Right.
they were older than me when I first watched it, but like then when I've watched it the last few years, I've sort of seen like them as peers, but now it's like I'm older than like 10 years older than them when
Right.
they were in it, and it's so, but I didn't, they, to me they still feel older than me. It's that thing
Right.
where like you never sort of see yourself as the age that you are. So
Oh yeah.
I had like a bit of a crisis, because it's like, can I like Christian Slater in this now anymore, because like I'm older than him now, like I'm older than him when he was in this, like is that allowed, is it? So yeah, it really, films, anniversaries and things just mess with my head quite a lot.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, for me, the same because I was 19 when it came out. And so they were older than I was at that point. And, it's still the same today. Like, it's interesting just to see it like and to watch it and still feel like, even though I'm getting close to 50 myself, that I still watch it and enjoy it. And I still see myself in Clarence. And, even though I'm like, you know, like I'm already like 20 plus years older than he was in that. And so it's interesting to do that and still find connection. And that's what I love about film too, is finding that connection despite, age or difference or whatever, And so it's fun to get that.
Yeah, it's like you're always the age that you were when you first watched it, whenever you watch it.
Yeah.
So it always, always takes you back to, like in True Romance's case of like, being, as both of you being at various stages of being a teenager, despite, when we watch it, years later, it's still, I'm sort of taken back to who I was that first time, which is it's a quite nice way to sort of keep in touch with your older self in a way.
Right. Exactly. All right. Um, any other uh, things you want to say about True Romance itself?
I guess the last thing I would say is, for anybody that does get hold of the Arrow disc, I mean, I think it was on one of their order releases as well, but I highly recommend listening to Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette's audio commentary.
Yeah.
If for nothing else, then to hear two people who obviously worked intensely closely together, who've had a few years apart and who've been sat next to each other and suddenly remember that they filmed a love scene together. Their reaction to that footage is hilarious. They're both clearly uncomfortable and so a little bit older now, and
Yeah.
times have changed and things. But then it's just so nice to sort of hear them as the film goes through. The scene with Dennis Hopper and Christopher Walken, they just don't talk, and they're sort of whispering, "Go, we can't talk over this. It's so good." It's just nice to see that they still think of this film so fondly, and with it being an early place marker in their careers, they're still like in awe of these titans that came in and sort of did these couple of scenes, and they, like the viewer, are like, shh, this is the big like monologue scene between these two guys. So I definitely highly recommend giving that a listen if you're a fan of the film, because it's quite nice to get an insight into the actors' experience.
Yeah, that's one of the things I want to do. I know that the commentaries have been on the discs before. I believe most of the commentaries, if
Yeah,
not all of the commentaries, have been on the disc before, but I don't think I've listened to any of them. So that's one of the things I am interested in doing this time, is rewatching them and watching them with the commentaries, and that sounds like a fun commentary to listen to for sure.
yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, yeah, definitely. I can't wait to get my disc. I'm super excited for it. As soon as I saw it hit Arrow before, when it was UK only, I was so disappointed. I have a region free player, but I try not to buy too much region or that's other stuff, because I got burned on that before by Arrow, because I bought the UK version of Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, and then like a few months later they released it for the US, and I was like, oh man. So
Yeah,
I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna double dip again. But it this time I waited and I was like, okay, I'm hoping. And thankfully my patience uh, bore out this time. So I'm excited to get that. Well, now we move on to Natural Born Killers. And this movie is one that I don't like. I actually really, really do not like this movie. I watched it when I originally watched it back when it came out. I believe I actually saw this one in the theater. And I was excited because I was like, okay, it's Quentin Tarantino. This looks crazy. Part of it was filmed near where I lived at the time in Albuquerque. The drug zone scene is was filmed at a location very close to where I lived at in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the time, and so that was interesting to me as well. And then I watched it, and it is it's crazy, but for me, I understand what Oliver Stone is going for in his and even then it was trying to talk about the media and our obsession with crime and criminals and everything, and now like it seems even more prescient than ever. But I feel like he went so over the top with it that it doesn't work as well for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think whereas True Romance, you could tell that Tarantino had a hand in it as well as Tony Scott. This is an Oliver Stone film. It's
Yes.
there's no getting around it. It's almost like when you find out that Tarantino wrote the script, you're like, or the story that it was based on, you're like, what, really? Because there's so little that feels like what is recognizably him these days.
Right. Yeah, and that was the difference too that I saw too, is that when you watch True Romance, it literally says written by Quentin Tarantino, and this in Natural Born Killers, it says story by Quentin Tarantino, but screenplay by Oliver Stone and others, and so you can tell that they took the framework of what Tarantino had written and created their own movie with it, and that's fine too. That's a director's prerogative, but it definitely does not feel like a Tarantino movie whatsoever. And it's interesting too because both True Romance and Natural Born Killers were actually combined as one movie at one point. It was a much larger movie called The Open Road,
Yeah.
and it was then split into two separate movies, which became Natural Born Killers um, and True Romance. And I think, thank God that they did that, and that one works so much better than the other. Because Natural Born Killers, just I don't know, the performances of Juliette Lewis and Woody Harrelson are just, they're just, I don't know, like I have no problem with unlikable characters, but they're so unlikable that I just don't care for them. And I know that you're not really supposed to care for them, but it just takes me so out of the movie that, and again, a lot of it is the experimental filming that he's doing. Like a lot of what Oliver Stone is doing with filming the movie is just, it takes you so far out of it that, at least for me, that it just does not work. I love the performances by Robert Downey Jr. and Tommy Lee Jones. I like what they're doing with their characters. They're wild and weird and everything, but it just the whole, the pieces don't come together as a whole for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first watched it, I was at college. We were like studying um, violence in the media, and
Right.
so we were stuck in front of Natural Born Killers because there was the controversy not long after release how two teenagers like dropped acid, watched the film, and then murdered some people, and
Right.
people were like blaming the film when you can't hold a piece of media accountable. You know, they were on
Exactly.
drugs. You know, they were on drugs which were, you know, lowering their inhibitions. There was potentially something already brewing away to make them more, you know, wanting to act upon those impulses. So but we sat in front of it, and at the time it was, you know, I was young, so I was like bright colors, loud, you know, violence, and you know, the sticking the finger up to the man sort of thing. And you just sort of thought it was a bit cool, but then sort of on a rewatch, it didn't seem as exciting to me anymore. It just, like you say, it just seems a bit muddled. And like, the acting, I mean, Juliette Lewis and Woody Harrelson are great actors, but
Right.
here it's almost like the brief was to play your characters like they're in a play or something. Like there's a scene early on where they're out in the desert or something, and she's stood like dancing around the car, and he's sort of slightly down the night sky, and she thinks she's talking about the stars and things, and it just feels like you're watching a stage play briefly. So, and
Right.
it's not that you're not drawn into the characters, you're always sort of kept at a distance from them. And so the performances too, because you are getting distracted by, it's black and white now, it's color now it's bright
Right.
green, now it's red, now we're like in the future, now we're back in the past, now we're in a
Right.
50s sitcom.
Yeah.
It's very hard to work out who these characters are, and although you don't necessarily have to like them, you do have to connect with them to be bothered about their story. And there
Right.
is, for me, there is a bit of a disconnect to what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, and that's movies that are like this, that are basically a series of set pieces, um that aren't really, that are basically are disjointed, that like, and this takes the weird timeline stuff that Tarantino does, and like takes it in the wrong direction by breaking it up as it does, and making it even more chaotic. It just makes things confusing, muddled. It's just, like you said, you don't connect with the characters, you don't connect with the story, and like I said, you can see what Oliver Stone is going for in terms of violence in the media, and talking about that, but you don't care. You don't end up caring about the characters. You don't care about the story. It ends up like, at least in my opinion, it ended up just making me more mad that it was so dumb, that that's what it felt like. It just felt like they were, everything felt like a caricature. Like everybody was so over the top, both, like, like I said, as much as I liked Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Downey Jr.'s characters, they were both caricatures of, that kind of media at the time, and those kind of people that you would assume, like, Tommy Lee Jones' Warden characters, so just over the top, um, like, I don't know, Southern fried, cartoony, that it's just like, look, I get that people kind of exist like that and probably existed like that, but it's, I don't know, it comes off gross and weird, and it didn't. I think even the movie itself comes off of, when people studied it at that time and when it came out, that it just came off as more of a joke than anything else. And I when people talk about Tarantino's work these days, I rarely, if ever, hear anybody talk about Natural Born Killers. It has become such a non-entity in his work that people have just completely dismissed it.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
think he himself has like disowned it as well, which I think has helped. Which is, again, it's, he brought True Romance into his universe, and like
exactly,
Natural Born Killers has just been left out in the cold to just get quietly forgotten about.
as it should be, which is why I don't own it. I was like, I had to actually, I was like, I didn't want to rent it, but I was pretty close to renting it, and then I discovered it was thankfully on Tubi, and so I was able to watch it there, and I was just like, okay, thank God I don't got to own it anywhere or pay money to actually watch this again, and so I was thankful about that, even despite having to watch commercials, but yeah, it's just, yeah, it's, I this probably has the lowest rating on my Letterboxd. I gave it a 1 star because this movie is just, to me, it's just trash. It's, I don't denigrate movies typically very very much, because I try to find something good in them, but this movie, there's so much that just does not work, that I can't do it. I cannot recommend this movie to anybody. No matter what, even if you like Oliver Stone, even if you like Tarantino, just don't watch this movie.
I think it's really interesting when you watch the sort of the two side by side, because like you say, they did
Yeah.
start in this original, the original story was like Clarence was a screenwriter, and when they were on the run, this was a script that he'd been working on, and Mickey and
Right.
Mally
Yeah.
were the characters in the script. But so there obviously are similarities in a way between the pair. Again, it's pitched as love at first sight between Mickey and Mallory, and they are headstrong about being in love together, and that's they sort of see their relationship as above everything else. But I think that's kind of in a way where the similarities stop, because the handling of them is so different. I mean, Clarence and Alabama are about a year apart. If you go by the births of Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette, she's a year older. Here
Right.
you've got Woody Harrelson, who was 12 years older. I mean, I know many people are in relationship gaps like that, and there's nothing necessarily
Right.
there's nothing wrong with that. But when you see it in this sort of film, where he is this older man coming in, and she's already been heavily abused by her own
Yeah.
father, it's like it just feels a bit creepy. It's
It's
like
very gross. Yeah.
she's not there's no sort of, it's always that she's just
There's
swapped one for another. It's this,
what? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
it's because it's swapped one father figure for another one, and
Yeah.
this one's just as bad, if not worse. And I think the
Yeah.
thing that stands out to me is, if you were to think, like 5-10 years down the line, are Mickey and Mallory still together? Are Clarence and Alabama still together? Mickey and Mallory, it's probably a no, because even when they're on the road together, he's wanting to sleep with other women. And
Yep.
the whole relationship is a lot of jealousy and power plays. Whereas, you fully believe that, Clarence and Alabama are, living out their best chill life in Cancun, with their
Right.
kid.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what I was going to say too, is that like with true romance, you feel like they are in love with each other, they are fully devoted to each other, and that they will live happily with each other. Sure, they'll have their ups and downs like any couple does, but they will still love each other at the end of the day. And whereas with Mickey and Mallory, you don't get that. You like never once do I feel like they are actually in love with each other. You feel, like you said, that she is just swapping one bad father figure for another, and that's and for Mickey, he's just grabbing a young girl that he can mold and create this compatible killer with him, and it's a very abusive, very toxic relationship. And I think that's another part of what takes me out of it, is because there's just no, that you never feel like they're actually in love with each other. This whole, and they try to put that in the movie too. They interview, you get these little interview snippets with people on the street, and how much they love Mickey and Mallory, and how much all this, this couple they want to emulate and everything. I'm like, but why?
Yeah.
Like none of that. It's to me, it feels like people who really like the Joker and Harley like
Yes.
relationship. It's like, no, 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 no. Joker and Harley is not something to aspire to. So,
No.
so
No, it's
it's just
definitely
like,
there.
yeah,
It's that
yeah,
it's that toxic, relationship before we were really discussing toxic relationships, and there it is,
exactly.
in movie form, trying to spin it as this is the cool thing to do. But there's a telling scene towards the end when they're talking to Wayne Gale, where Mallory's like, oh, we're going to make some babies, and there's just a look that Mickey gives where you can tell that he doesn't want kids, and it's like, yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
guys, you're not compatible in any way, shape, or form. You've had no conversations. You've just literally, you were her way out of this,
Yep.
and you say she was, a new mind for him to influence.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's and to the people who are fans of this movie and are fans of that relationship are definitely like questionable at best. It's again, people who are fans of the Joker and Harley. It's like, no, you should not be admiring these people. They should not be a couple that you think is a good representation of what love is.
No,
Go
and it's
back and
it's
watch True Romance. That's a good movie.
yeah, yeah, and even obviously in terms of like the violence and things, normally, violence has some sort of repercussion. I mean, like in
Yeah.
True Romance, obviously, Drexel is killed in a bloody and violent way, but everything we've heard about him is he's an awful piece of work. He's been horrible to Alabama and her friends.
Right.
Here we see what the father is doing and thinking about with Mallory,
Right.
and he is obviously dealt with. He's like drowned in the fish tank or whatever. But for me, then the mother gets the much more like horrible death. They
Yeah.
tie her to a bed and set her on fire. And I get that the point is, you were complicit in this. You let him do this to me. But I just really struggle with how her death is so much more torturous than that
Yeah.
of her actual aggressor. And that to me, sort of on a watch back, was like, I mean, her mum was a victim too. She obviously was
Exactly.
trapped. She didn't see a way out. Yeah, okay, she shouldn't have let him do what he was doing to their daughter. But women that find themselves in these situations, there's a reason for that. They can't get out. She was,
Right.
we don't know. She might have tried to stop it, and yet all we see on screen is her getting burned alive, which was just so horrific. I completely forgotten
Yeah.
that was in there until I watched it again. I
Yeah.
was like, that's like brutal.
Yeah. No, I was surprised by that as well, because I was just like, wow. It's like, I get that. Yeah, I had the same exact thoughts. Was like, I get that she maybe didn't stop it, but you don't know that she didn't try. And, she was obviously abused by him as well. It was obviously a very abusive relationship for them. And, and then Mallory's just repeating the same mistakes with Mickey.
Mm.
And, so it's turning into that same toxic relationship, just on that other level. You've taken all the mistakes that happen with your parents, and you're translating them into your relationship as well, and it's not going to go well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's sort of like we've discussed the cartoonish nature of like a lot of the other characters, but I think it's Tom Sizemore's character that feels like he's in a
Mm.
different film. He feels like the only one that's sort of
Yeah.
playing it straight. Like you could see that character transposed out into various other films. He's obviously the dirty cop essentially. I think that
Right.
he almost sticks out like a sore thumb because he doesn't. It's like he wasn't quite sure what he was doing because he doesn't go
Right.
full cartoon like everybody else around him is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's got some cartoonish moments, but definitely not as nuts as Robert Downey Jr. and Tommy Lee Jones and Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis. All of them are playing it at like 90, and he's playing it at maybe 50.
Yeah.
And so it's not he does feel like he's in a different movie. He's still more over the top here than he is in True Romance, where True Romance, he's playing more of a normal everyday cop
Yeah.
character. And so it was so funny to see both of these movies and see him in essentially a very similar role, but taken in two different directions. So,
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
but yeah. So any last thoughts about these movies that we didn't get to?
I think Natural Born Killers was probably sort of like of its time.
Yes.
I don't think it's held up as well. I think there are better films that have dealt with similar issues. I mean, there was one I released a couple of years ago, an indie one with Bella Thorne in called Infamous. That's
Mm,
a similar thing. A woman and her boyfriend go on a crime spree. They're not necessarily. I think they're robbing banks, so it's a bit
right.
more sort of Bonnie and Clyde. But I feel like that's potentially a film that you could seek out to look at the hero worship of criminals these days.
Right.
It's a bit more savory. It's a bit more palatable. Whereas True Romance, I don't think there's been anything like it since, and
Yeah.
it still holds up. I mean, okay, there's not like the technology or anything that we've got these days, but that doesn't matter. It's one of those films that's sort of timeless
It
in its
transcends time.
construction.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
So
for sure.
yeah,
Yeah. And I don't think there's been anything like True Romance since. There's never been a movie that for me that has captured what it captured and has done it any better. So
Yeah, so watch True Romance again, and
yes.
let's do like Quentin and move on from Natural Born Killers.
Yes, exactly. Yes. All right. So where can people find you on the internet if you want
Uh,
anybody to find you?
so Letterboxd and Twitter, I am at Gizmo Shikari, and most of my writing is for the Hollywood News, which is at THNcom on Twitter. But there's links to all of my work on my Twitter page, so you can find everything there. And I think when this episode goes live, I will delve into the archives. And the one and only time I've ever cosplayed in my life was as Alabama Whirly, and
Oh, wow.
I will share that with the world, because we weren't we're not me and my husband are not particularly extroverted, and we went to a lot of conventions, and it's like, well, we probably should dress up once, but we're not into fancy dress. And it's like, well, why don't we just go as
Right.
parents in Alabama, because they're essentially just wearing like normal
Yeah.
clothes. So
That's
yes,
awesome.
I will share that out.
I can't wait to see that. That'll be very cool. So, all right. Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. I had a great time, and hopefully we can have you back for another episode.
Definitely love talking about films.
Thanks again to Kat Hughes for coming on this episode. Next episode, I talked to Lindsay Hedden about the movies From Dusk Till Dawn and Jackie Brown. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more from our TeePublic page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.